Not a great old start to Friday morning. It's wet and it's pretty windy out there. And that's the picture we're painting right across the weekend. Plenty of scattered showers in the mix. We'll have full details on that. All the latest traffic to help you avoid those hot spots this Friday morning. Plus lots of your photos. Put a bit of smoke. Smile your break.
Watch Derek. Let's say he's recovering. He's okay.
Some places charge you $4 for a deal like this. Well, we got beef with that.
The director of the CIA has devoted a few minutes of his first interview on a national TV network in America to a very familiar story. Accusations that Russia meddled in the US presidential elections. In fact, he believes it was part of a decades-long effort to undermine American democracy. But Russia's always denied any interference.
I can't talk about the details of the intelligence, but the intelligence community has said that this election was meddled with by the Russians. In a way that is frankly not particularly original. They've been doing this for an awfully long time, and we are decades into the Russians trying to undermine American democracy.
And if the CIA chief isn't tired of accusing the Kremlin, since many Americans are sick of the same old story, a newly released poll suggests that more than half of the people surveyed would now like to see Congress and the media focus on other issues, such as healthcare, for example. Well, we got expert opinion on the allegations against Russia from John McAfee. He created the first commercial antivirus software, and he's also worked for NASA too. He told us the US elections could have been hacked by anyone. That's how easy it was.
I feel that Russia has been seriously abused by America, and certainly our American government and politicians over the false accusations that Russia tried to hack our election. I know for a fact that Russia did not hack the DNC source. Absolutely not. Yet all of our politicians, all of them, are going crazy about, yes, the Russians tried to hack us. They tried to control us. We had a report from Homeland Security here in America that actually included the malware, the software that was used for the hack. Well, myself and hundreds of other researchers have looked at that and discovered that it's a very common piece of malware called PAS web shell. It was collected from a website that only asked for donations, and it was 6 versions old. And even the newest version only sells for $50. Now I ask you, please, people, do you believe that the Russian government cannot afford to pay even $50 if they wanted to buy that software, that they would go to a donated site where you didn't have to pay anything? It was some teenager, a random teenager somewhere in the world that did this.
Since his 2016 presidential campaign, Donald Trump has been doing time and time again, promising to bring the nation together.
I say it is time for us to come together as one united people. We may have our differences. We are strongest when we are unified.
Good plan, but the divisions appear to have deepened since last year's election, pitting not only political opponents, but even US states now against each other, as Callum Mopin reports.
Liberal California is unhappy with some of its conservative sister states. It's banned state-sponsored travel to Texas, Alabama, South Dakota, and Kentucky, with North Carolina, Mississippi, Kansas, and Tennessee already on the list. These sanctions of sorts are bringing up some interesting historical memories. California says that it's taking this action in response to what it says is discrimination against lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people.
Each of those states in the recent weeks have enacted legislation that may deprive some of the individuals of those states and individuals who visit those states of their constitutional rights. There are consequences to discrimination. Restricting state-sponsored travel is a consequence.
I think they're just trying to cause infighting in the US. I think the ultimate goal of liberals is some kind of civil war, and that's their goal, at least.
But the Lone Star State is fighting back. Texas, along with 12 other states, is threatening to sue California for its climate change initiative, which discloses companies' investments in fossil fuels. Now, the governor of California has announced that he's ready to fight against the Republicans in D.C.
California and other states and other provinces throughout the world will step up.
There's already been talk of a Cal exit, or this liberal state behemoth breaking away from the rest of the country.
Things seem to be escalating right now in a war of words between the conservative forces and California. California is more to the left of the Trump agenda, of the nation. So right now, California is one of the more progressive states in this country.
And not to be outdone, a few Texans are now raising the idea of secession and raising the Lone Star flag once again.
We are advocating for Texas leaving the Union. We've been doing this now for well over a decade. And we've come, in this last legislative session, we came closer than we've ever come before. There are going to be states that are going to be leaving the Union, and it's going to happen sooner rather than later.
If you pay attention to American politics, it's pretty clear that folks don't see eye to eye. But are we really getting back to Civil War levels where we all can't be one country? Some folks certainly think so. And the gap between liberal and conservative states is only getting bigger. Caleb Maupin, RT, New York.
6 police officers have been injured in London after a protest against police brutality turned violent. 4 people were arrested there. Let's go live to London, see what's happening now. Our correspondent Polly Boyk is there. Hi, Polly. How did this escalate? Where did it all kick off from?
Well, we are at this location where this protest that was peaceful ended up turning violent, and 6 police officers were injured as a result. It all started last night, but it carried on into the early hours of the morning, and protesters here were throwing bricks at this police station. They were throwing beer bottles as well, and they were trying to access the building. The reason they were so angry was they were demonstrating over the death of a 25-year-old local black man. His name was Federico da Costa. Locally, he was known as Edson. He was a car mechanic. He was pulled over by police when he was in his car earlier this month, and campaigners say he was brutally beaten. Some reports even that he may have died as a result of his neck being broken. And he died in hospital 6 days after that initial incident with the police. So the protesters that were here last night were saying that all they want to know is how Mr. da Costa died. Take a listen.
No shot's been broken. We just want answers from them. If they can give us answers, come on, man. Their family members are crying. Dad's mother crying. That's a lot of pain, man. A lot of pain, man. You got killed him. He was dead for me, and he had shot me like because you got killed him, and he's not trying to cover it. He's not trying to cover it. I'm trying to get away with it.
Well, the Metropolitan Police have said in a statement that as he was being detained, Mr. da Costa became unwell. They've also confirmed that no police officers have been suspended as a result of this incident with Mr. da Costa. The police watchdog here in the UK is investigating what led to his death, though. It's the Independent Police Complaints Commission, and they've already said that an initial post-mortem carried out on Mr. da Costa hasn't indicated that he died from spinal injuries.
Right, so there seems to be a big discrepancy there between what the victim's family and friends are saying, what the police initially are saying, Polly. Yeah. All right, thanks for the update there from London. Let's get more thoughts on it from Martin J, award-winning journalist. Let's start with that. Yeah, why the discrepancy here, do you think? I mean, the victim's family, as we just heard, claiming that this guy's neck was broken, he suffered head injuries. The Independent Police Complaints Commission says a preliminary examination has failed to establish that. Quite a big discrepancy. Why?
Oh, that's a tough question to ask at this stage. We just don't know. But I think perhaps the answer, or the question we should be asking, is how independent is the IPPC? I mean, police are police unit investigating colleagues for potential manslaughter is not ideal, is it? So this discrepancy is there, and I think the family
is
are
there
quite
reason to
right
doubt their credibility?
to complain about it and to. Well, I think so. Yeah, I mean, there's a lack of accountability. They don't seem to have made any real symbolic gesture to suspending any officers, and we should also look at the history. I mean, if you only have to go back to 2011. This is not the first time a black individual has been arrested and has died under police custody in the UK. So I think that raises a lot of important question marks, and I think the family deserve answers, and they deserve them in a proper form.
I mean, we saw the anger of those people there. You just brought it up yourself. We saw what kicked off back in 2011 in London over Mark Duggan, his death. He was shot and killed by police in Tottenham, North London. And boy, didn't it kick off. We saw huge riots there that seemed to be almost spontaneously coming out of nothing. Very quick, very fierce. Worries this kind of thing might happen again, though.
Yeah, it may well do. I mean, if you look at the Black Lives Matter whole issue, that's beginning to permeate into it now. We're seeing a lot of people on social media get behind that. I think the problem of institutionalized racism in the British police is endemic, and I think this is just one more ugly example. So I think that the all eyes now will be on the police commissioner to see if he can contain this, and also on Theresa May. Let's not forget, Theresa May is buckling. A government is having a very hard time indeed containing terror attacks and this sort of irregularities. So we also need much more governance and clearer and better answers about what happened to this young man.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know the actual facts yet, so the investigations will continue. Of course, you look at so many cases reported so regularly of police brutality in the United States, also in France. Is it just the way it is these days? The police are having to get tougher because they're. I mean, what is bringing it on? The police having to get tougher because they're facing more violence, or are they just getting less marshalled in the way they would deal with this sort of thing?
Well, I think the problem is they're under greater pressure. I mean, in Britain in particular, where the police are they're facing more cuts, so they're having to do the same job with less money. And the pressure from the public and the pressure from a new wave of terror attacks is making things easier for them. So they're under extraordinary strains. Now, when I mentioned earlier institutionalized racism, if you look at the statistics, in Britain, you're 28 times more likely to be arrested as a black man as a Caucasian. And I think the pressure and the strain affects some of those police officers. And the knee-jerk reaction is to overreact towards the black community.
Martin, thanks for giving us your thoughts, award-winning journalist as you are. Always a pleasure to see you on the show. Thank you. Investigators looking into the St. Petersburg metro bombing in April say the attacker and his accomplices used a controversial encrypted messaging service to plan and carry out the atrocity. I got more details earlier from my correspondent, Ilya Petrenko.
The Telegram messaging app is famous for its outstanding levels of privacy, with all the encryption, with the secret chats. Just to remind you, almost 3 months ago, a suicide bomber killed 15 people in the St. Petersburg metro. And the investigation into that got to the point when the Russian Federal Security Service are saying that at all stages of the preparation, both the attacker and whoever assisted him in Russia and abroad were using Telegram. Another thing that they're saying is that Telegram, with all its encryption features, has become the most widely used app by terrorist organizations in Russia when it comes to messaging. Now, just a little earlier, Russia's communications regulator Roskomnadzor said that it could be days away from blocking Telegram. Russian authorities have demanded that the Telegram team provide access to the chats and their crypto keys when and if needed, to which the founder, Pavel Durov, said no. And he also added that the privacy and the people's right to it is more important than the fear of terrorism.
Of course, it's not just Telegram. There are other apps around as well that I guess could conceivably be used by terrorists as well.
There's the general public that's got nothing to do with the terrorism, and genuinely, they really praised all the new features that these texting apps are now, like Telegram, are offering with the new levels of privacy. But the authorities are on high alert, and they're absolutely not happy with these loopholes. And perhaps that is justified, because two research organizations have published at least 100 reports of jihadist organizations using Telegram in the past. You were saying that there are other apps that are upgrading their encryption facilities, like WhatsApp. Developers of that got under fire in the UK after the terrorist attacks in Britain. And that was criticism on a very high profile level.
Companies to develop tools to identify and remove harmful materials automatically. I want to see them report this vile content to the authorities and block the users who spread it.
There should be no place for terrorists to hide. We need to make sure that organizations like WhatsApp, and there are plenty of others like that, don't provide a secret place for terrorists to communicate with each other. We need to make sure that our intelligence services have the ability to get into situations like encrypted WhatsApp.
Kevin, but the great threat is still out there. And since the number of terrorist attacks in Europe has only been increasing, I guess it is fair to say that the authorities have failed to contain it. And now they are saying that the only way for them to do it is get access to the chats and crypto keys. So in the near future, we are bound to hear more debate on that, the usual thing, security versus privacy. Only Obama administration, when they look back, wish that they would have done more.
So, in defense of the Obama administration, Jay Johnson has been out, Michael, and one of the things that he said is basically, this was his defense on the decision-making process, is that we were going to be seen as taking sides in the middle of an election. We had one candidate already saying that the election was rigged against them, rigged against him, of course, that being President Trump. Was it a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, do you think?
Well, maybe. Listen, I've got great respect for Jay Johnson, but this should have been seen strictly through a national security lens. I'm afraid it was part of a pattern in the Obama administration of sort of paralysis by analysis. And this is and was so serious. I think they had to have seen it that way and approach Russia very strongly. We have a serious admission in the Washington Post that they really choked the response to this great threat. And so, at the end of the day, I think they should have acted, and they should have acted a lot stronger than they did.
Yeah, Michael, let me ask you, if you look at kind of the bigger picture here, you had a candidate in President Trump and then President Trump, who spent a lot of time either dodging questions about who was behind the hack or downplaying how serious the meddling was, or downplaying if Russia was behind it or was to blame. And now you see, especially today, him coming out against Obama, criticizing him for not acting fast enough, and implies that this is a serious situation. I mean, can both of these things be true? Don't pay attention to it, but Obama didn't do enough about it.
Yeah, look, I don't think it's totally consistent with where the president's been. I do recall that he got in a briefing sometime before he was inaugurated, where he went close to admitting that the Russians had certainly been involved in the election. But look, it's manifestly true. I'll take it, better late than never. This is a serious issue that Russia needs to be retaliated against. I would flag one thing for you, Kate, and that's that Russia sanctions are coming through the Congress. Yes. And it's going to be a political catastrophe, I think, if President Trump tries to threaten a veto or veto those sanctions when they come to his desk.
And I think there are Republicans Republicans in the Senate who are ready to face him down on that. If it comes to that, we will see. You're exactly right, Michael. About the question of the tapes, the president brought up tapes in a different regard with this tweet, but it's come up again, and it's not been put to bed, if you will, Jamie, because of what the White House is still saying about the tapes. The president didn't have tapes, But then the White House is still leaving open the possibility. Kellyanne Conway did it this weekend again, saying that he is leaving open the possibility that this could have happened, that someone else has tapes. I mean, the question that Kellyanne Conway was asked and did not answer is, couldn't the president find that out himself if someone had been taping?
Obviously. I mean, I think we're asking sane questions about a very almost insane situation. The New York Times on Sunday had a long list of just the lies of this administration. It's nothing like this has ever been seen in the history of American presidential politics. So there is just such a fast and loose being played with the truth. And on this issue, there was last week, the Russia investigation was a hoax. Now it's real, and President Obama didn't do enough. But the question is, President Trump is the president of the United States. If the United States was attacked, what's he doing about it? I don't see anything.
Just real quick, Michael, we're out of time. On the most basic level, you both came from different administrations. You both work, though, on this issue. Is it conceivable, is it possible that the intelligence community would be taping conversations between a president and an FBI director in the Oval Office without the president knowing?
Absolutely not. Look, you want to know what irritates me most in this entire discussion is the idea that there would be political spying going on in the United States. It's a myth that has been propagated by Edward Snowden types, and I just can't countenance this coming from any responsible national security person.
It's great to have both of you here. I really appreciate it, trying to cut through it. Thank you, gentlemen. Programming note for all of you out there. Tomorrow night, a special CNN report. Jim Sciutto is going to take you inside the Russia hacking investigation. Are there tapes, sir?
Oh, you're going to be very disappointed when you hear the answer. Don't worry.
Why won't you just explain whether or not there are recordings of
I think the president's made it clear what his position is.
That's not my question.
I
Why
understand
won't
that
you
because
explain?
that's what the president's position is.
I'm not hinting anything. I'll tell you about it over a very short period of time. Okay? Okay. Do you have a question here? When will you tell us?
When he's ready to make the announcement, we'll let you know. How's that?
Good morning and welcome to AM Joy. Before announcing his bid for the White House with a trip down the golden escalator at Trump Tower almost exactly 2 years ago, Donald Trump was best known for displaying his name on buildings and for saying, "You're fired," on NBC's The Apprentice. Now, you might have noticed by now that the former TV star carried some reality show habits with him to the Oval Office. He seems particularly fond of one specific game show device, the tease. Well, now, unlike TV, where the goal is to get you to come back after the commercial break, Trump's teases seem designed to keep us all on the edge of our news feeds and thus distracted from his many scandals. For example, Trump tweeted for weeks to tee up his final decision on the Paris Climate Accord. It was 3 p.m. on May 31st. Did you tune in live? Spoiler alert, it was not a hit. And earlier that month, Trump had the entire nation waiting for the answer to one question. Are there tapes of his conversations with former FBI Director James Comey, who, before he was fired, was running the Russia investigation? But this week, when we finally got the big reveal that Trump definitely, indisputably does not have any recordings and never actually did, we learned that the original tapes tweet was unlike his other teases. It wasn't meant for us. It seems like it was meant exclusively for James Comey, ahead of his testimony before the Senate Intelligence Committee.
When he found out that that there may be tapes out there, whether it's governmental tapes or anything else, and who knows, I think his story may have changed. I mean, you'll have to take a look at that. My story didn't change. My story was always a straight story. My story was always the truth.
It was a smart way to make sure he stayed honest in his hearings.
Well, it wasn't very stupid. I can tell you that.
The thing is, when a misleading tease is meant to influence an audience of one, the man in charge of the investigation that could take Trump down, perhaps that tease is less of a Trump show cliffhanger and more of a device for witness intimidation. And joining us now is Malcolm Dance, author of The Plot to Hack America, business and political marketing consultant Tara Dowdell, David Korn, Washington Bureau Chief for Mother Jones, and former Assistant Watergate Special Prosecutor Jill Wine-Banks. There will be no chair turns. You guys will not have to sing. So thank you very much for being here.
Let's start with that question of why, Tara. You know Donald Trump probably better than most of us that are on this panel here. Why would he have set up this sort of long, lengthy, suspense about whether he had tapes? Because clearly he's always known he didn't have any.
Right. So to your point earlier, which the point you made in your open, is that Donald Trump is carrying practices over from reality TV. The Apprentice is arguably the most successful thing that he has ever done. Yeah. And he is well aware of that. So Donald Trump is the type of person, if it worked for him in the past, he's going to do it again as long as he thinks it's going to work for him. And he thinks this strategy of the tease, as you coined it, works for him. Yeah. The other dynamic is Donald Trump. The reason why we saw him reveal that it was in fact a tease and that there are no tapes. The reason why is because when he does something that he feels is strategic, he wants the credit. So when the reporter asked him, when the host asked him and said, that was a very smart strategy, that right there was the bait. Yeah. And so for someone like Donald Trump, he was not going to let that go because he wants people to know. It's just like when he fired Comey. He and his staff went out and said, oh, no, it wasn't the president. And then the next day he said, no, I fired Comey. Yeah. Because Donald Trump wants the credit.
Yeah. But Jill Wine-Banks, one of the problems, though, is that Donald Trump may in his own mind, as Tara said, have this attitude that, well, I'm doing this, I'm getting the credit, I'm getting some emotional payoff from doing it. But couldn't what he did, pretending there were tapes and then admitting that he did it in order to send a message to Jim Comey, couldn't that actually be witness intimidation or tampering?
It could be. I think the combination of facts is really what becomes intimidation. That in and of itself isn't that significant. But when you add that tweet to all of the other things he did, the conversation he had in the White House, to his firing Comey, all of those things make you view the tweet differently and could be intimidation.
Yeah, and David Corn, a former White House ethics lawyer, actually wrote in The Hill, or tweeted, and The Hill tweeted it out, that the lack of the Comey tapes and the fact that there never were any, Donald Trump knew there weren't any, but said it anyway in his own words in order to send a message to Comey, that it actually is witness intimidation.
Well, it may be. I've heard other people say it's hard to make the case if you're doing it presumably to get someone to tell the truth as opposed to cover up something. In any event, it is absurd. It's absurd that for weeks and weeks he wouldn't answer the question, and then ultimately his position is, I had to lie or suggest a lie in order to get someone else not to lie. I mean, this is a president who says that he was wiretapped in Trump Tower when he wasn't, who suggests he has tapes of the Comey meetings when he doesn't, and then he complains about fake news. I mean, the cognitive dissonance here should be his campaign motto next time. Make America confused again. I mean, it's really, and it's kind of sad that the media didn't at one point, at least the White House press corps, walk out of the press conferences when Sean or when he would not give an answer to this very simple question.
Yeah, or when they wouldn't let them record. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. Malcolm, one of the things that we know that's happening behind the scenes, in addition to Donald Trump putting up all of these sort of shows for us and sort of doing entertainment as part of his presidency, is that behind the scenes he actually seems to be significantly concerned about this probe. There was a piece, NBC News actually did this reporting, that Dan Coates, the director of national intelligence, told House investigators, even though he wouldn't say it in the open hearing. He said his feelings, so that he didn't want to talk about conversations. But behind closed doors, he told the House committee that Trump did seem obsessed with the Russia probe.
Sure, absolutely. And we've been at this for almost a year now, 10 months at this point. Why? Why is Donald Trump obsessed with covering up this probe? It's a national counter-espionage investigation that now appears that it looks, based on the lawyers that Director Mueller has hired, is now going into a massive financial fraud and RICO investigation. And so one of those two things is going to happen here, or both. Espionage tied to dirty money, or a massive dirty money thing. Trump has got to be very concerned about that. And like the guy who's trying to intimidate some, underling at the DA's office in South Manhattan, he thinks there's a big real estate developer he can get away with it. He's not going to get away with this. Mueller is playing a reality show too, and it's called Presidential Apprentice, and there's only one contestant. Yeah. And there's only one result that comes from the end of it. Yeah. You're either fired or you're not fired. I think Trump is terrified of that.
Yeah, and at the risk of asking you to psychoanalyze him, Tara, I mean, this is a guy who has refused to release his tax returns. Obviously, there's something in his business past, the way he does business, that he doesn't want revealed through those tax returns. Behind the scenes, whatever he's doing, they've got to be concerned. They're not digging into the way that he does business, and he does do business with some characters that have got some ties to some interesting Russian money, put it that way.
Exactly. He has ties. First of all, it's not just Russia. In other countries where there are shady characters as well. And he's done business. He continues. His family is continuing to do business in countries that are highly suspect, that have human rights abuses. Donald Trump is used to getting away with things. That is what he's done his entire life. He's gotten away with taking advantage of people, not paying people, corruption. He's gotten away with so much that now he's at the point where he knows that things are a little bit different this time.
Yeah.
And so I think he has awareness that things are different this time. That's why he closed the door when he was in the meeting with Comey. That's why he's behaving and hiding information. The notion that he does not know that the vices around his neck is a false notion, because his behavior is indicative of someone that knows that there's trouble. And it's consistent with how he's behaved in the past when he's had trouble. Yeah. The difference is he's gotten away with it. I think he knows the stakes are much higher and the game is a lot different.
And Jill, just talk a little bit about, the jeopardy here is that this is not an independent counsel. This is not a Ken Starr situation. This is actually a prosecutor that, in theory, the president could fire. He could order Rod Rosenstein, the deputy attorney general, to fire Mueller, or he could just, somehow engineer to get him out. In theory, can you talk a little bit about the jeopardy here? That this is an investigation that could go in a lot of different directions, right? It's not limited just to Russiagate.
It is definitely not limited, and although it may sound trite, let's remember in Watergate the phrase "follow the money." Because I think your question to the last guest is really on point, and that it is the financial wrongdoings that may be the undoing of this president, and that the investigation can easily go to those kinds of dealings, to looking at what would we see if we saw his tax returns? What are his dealings with the Russian banks? Why was Jared Kushner meeting with a sanctioned bank? There seems to be no legitimate explanation for that. And this investigation is being led by someone who is greatly respected by almost everyone, maybe not by President Trump, who's now trying to impugn his credibility, but that hasn't been successful. And so I think that it could really lead to something much bigger. And he made a big mistake when he took actions that led to the appointment of the special prosecutor. And our deputy attorney general has said he will not fire him except for cause, which means the president would have to repeat the Saturday Night Massacre. He'd have to fire Rod Rosenstein so that he could appoint someone who would carry out his order to fire Mr. Mueller.
Yeah, and you already, David, have Donald Trump trying to find an ally to put in charge of the FBI. He's clearly trying to create loyalists that can protect him, but it doesn't seem likely that he really can in any way get in Mueller's way.
He is in a bad spot. He has a guy who has a tremendous amount of experience around him. I did the story this week. It's a little complicated, but one fellow who was involved in a prosecution of Felix Sater, a case investigation of him, a mobbed up real estate developer who Trump worked with in the 2000s, is now on the team of Mueller. So there are a lot of people who know a lot about different areas of the investigation. But I just don't go to one big point that I don't want people to lose sight of. It becomes clearer and clearer every single day that Donald Trump aided and abetted Putin's operation against the United States and the election. Throughout the whole summer and even after the election, after the U.S. government had said that it was Putin doing this and that it was a Russian operation, he kept denying it was happening. That's the same thing as aiding and abetting. It's like being outside a bank robbery and saying nothing's going on when you know what's going on inside. And that's the big sin here. Goes even beyond the financial stuff. He helped this operation.
And Malcolm, he simply admitted that he knew about it today in a tweet.
Well, in his tweet yesterday. That he put out. He essentially put, and it's actually fascinating to learn that Donald Trump watches MSNBC and is a big fan. And that being said, I have something I'd like to say to him, right? As President of the United States, and I beg you, come out and tell us that whatever you know and whatever your staff knows about Russia and collusion with WikiLeaks, throw them under the bus, right? Save yourself But let's get this nation past that.
Yeah.
And if he can't understand that, he needs to take a long walk around that building that he lives in and look at all the people in this history who have protected this democracy. Otherwise, he doesn't have any interest in protecting this nation.
Yep, and you know, he does. So you can't talk to him through the TV, so you might have heard that. Malcolm, Tara, and David will be back. Jill Weinbanks, thank you very much. And up next, Donald Trump finally does acknowledge Russia's election attack, and all it took was the chance to say it's all President Obama's fault. Stay with us.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.
Russia's history always shows that we've lived under sanctions since the moment when we were on our feet. We know that the US Senate is mulling a new bill to tighten sanctions against Russia. But why? Nothing has been happening, nothing extraordinary. So what's the reason for debate on new sanctions?
The Obama administration actually answered that very question for Vladimir Putin back in October, using the red phone to warn Russia that there could be consequences, there would be consequences for hacking our election. This week, the Senate voted 98-2 to impose new sanctions, part of those very consequences. And according to a new Bloomberg article, Russia's intrusion into our election was even more extensive than we thought. Russian hackers attacked election systems in 39 states in the months leading up to the election, twice as many as previously reported. And joining me now are one of the reporters on that story, Jordan Robinson of Bloomberg News, former FBI double agent Naveed Jamali, and Tara Mahler, senior policy advisor for the Counter Extremism Project. Thank you all for being here. Jordan, I'm going to start with you. It was your article that sort of inspired us to do this segment. The title of it is Russian Cyber Hacks on U.S. Electoral System Far Wider Than Previously Known. Those 39 states that were attacked, can you tell us, you know, you don't have to run them all down, but what are some of the major states that were attacked and what was done to them?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Joy. You know, the key message here is that at least 39 states were not just attacked, but in many cases actively breached by the same Russian group that attacked. I should say the tip of the spear for this was Illinois. Illinois was the first to discover these attacks in early July of 2016. Took a couple weeks to investigate, and then the federal government began sending those digital fingerprints of those attacks out to the rest of the states that were willing to receive them. And this really consumed the Obama White House as signatures started coming back, indicating that, again, at least 39 states had either active infections or attacks from this exact same group. We had a number of states that were hit, but again, Illinois was the main one. California, Florida had indications as well. We don't have the full list, but at least 39, potentially all of them.
And just to be clear, are we talking about going in and deleting people off the voter rolls, changing names? Like, what are we talking about here?
Yeah, that's the big thing. The reason Illinois is so significant is that what they discovered was not just an intrusion into the voter registration database there. Voter registration information is actually not that valuable on its own, but the ability to change it is extraordinarily valuable to an election hacker. And that's what Illinois saw. You know, unfortunately, what they saw was these attackers, again, these Russian state-sponsored attackers, were trying to alter or delete information such as people's names and addresses. And the point of that is, if you alter or delete that information on election day, if somebody goes to the polls and tries to vote, they're not going to be in the database. That's a really scary thought.
And Naveed, you and I talked about this a lot, that, when people say, oh, it's not a big deal that Russia attacked our electoral system because they didn't hack into voting machines and change the votes, meaning you went in and you clicked Clinton and it flipped it to Trump, because that didn't happen. This is not such a big deal. And I think you've heard a lot of Republicans try to make that case. But you have talked often about the fact that there were ways in which the Russian attack could have flipped the election, either by changing people's minds about who they voted for, or things like this, where you essentially delete people off the rolls, right?
Absolutely. I mean, you don't actually have to physically change the vote to actually be successful. In a lot of ways, just the simple act of delegitimizing our core infrastructure and the belief that the vote was legitimate, that's enough. So, the fact that the Russians were in there, the fact that they were detected, the fact that President Obama and Director Brennan warned the Russians that they should stop this, and they actually, I think that they probably did. And look, the other thing, Joy, is as of January 2017, one of the last things President Obama did was add the federal election into the critical infrastructure. I think that adds a level of security, but you're absolutely right. If we don't have confidence in the vote, in the fact that you put a vote in and it's going to be counted, then that delegitimizes the whole process. In a lot of ways, if the Russians can change the perception that this is a legitimate voting system, they've won.
And Tara, you're a former CIA military analyst, so this is a sort of a world that you've dealt in. We only know about this information because of somebody named Reality Winner, and that is her real name apparently. And she was charged. She was a former intelligence contractor. There's her mugshot there. She was charged with leaking classified information on the Russian hack. She's going to remain in jail until her trial. But we know about it because of her. Does it surprise you that we haven't seen the White House, the President of the United States, more concerned about this? This seems pretty alarming, and we learned from recent testimony, including by the former director of the FBI, that this is something that Donald Trump has never asked about. He hasn't seemed to be very curious about asking his CIA analysts, his FBI analysts more about this topic.
I think you're exactly right. It is very surprising that we didn't see more concern over this. This was not just a breach on the electoral system. This was a three-pronged attack by Russia. We saw them hack into candidates' emails. We saw them basically target voters in different states with bots online and messaging like a political campaign. And now we have this third prong to the attack, which was basically breaching our electoral system, the infrastructure itself. And that's sort of the new part of this story. And also the extent to which they did it. This wasn't just one small county. This was 39 states, at least 39 states. And while it is troublesome that the way we found out this information was through a leak essentially of classified information, and that individual does need to be prosecuted because that is unacceptable, this is not new information. We know Russia has been basically attacking and trying to attack our election basically through a variety of mechanisms. So that's not new. James Comey presented extremely definitive testimony. He didn't even need to elaborate. His confidence was so high. This comes on the heels of 16 intelligence agencies all in agreement. This is not a partisan decision. This is not a partisan conclusion. This is something that is happening. It's going to continue to happen. And until the United States creates a deterrent to Russia doing this, whether that's sanctions or preventative defensive mechanisms on the cybersecurity side, we're going to be in for this round two in the next election.
And you mentioned sanctions, Sarah. I want to get you and Naveed's response to the fact that now there has been a vote on additional sanctions. It went 98-2, and this is what is in the new sanctions bill that just passed the Senate. It targets individuals who are tied to malicious cyber activity. It requires Donald Trump to seek Congress's approval to ease sanctions against Russia. It gives Congress 30 days to potentially block Donald Trump from easing sanctions against Russia, and it allows the White House to take action against companies that aid Russian energy export pipelines. I'll start with you, Tara. Do you think that that is an effective response?
I think we do need to have sanctions in place in general in the cyber realm. Cybersecurity is a new issue for international relations. We haven't traditionally had strong policy measures in place as to what happens when these types of attacks happen. You've seen North Korea be very, active on this front, and Russia now with the election. So I do think the United States needs to have these measures in place, whether that's overt measures like sanctions or more covert measures on the cyber side, which we may or may not hear about. Yeah. I think these are all important components to a comprehensive cybersecurity strategy.
And Naveed, this was a vote that the Congress decided to tie to additional sanctions against Iran, which was problematic for at least one of the two senators who said no. Bernie Sanders and Rand Paul were the only two no votes against this bill. Senator Sanders issued a statement essentially saying that it was the Iran part of it that caused him to vote no. He said, I voted for sanctions on Iran in the past. I believe sanctions were an important tool for bringing Iran to the negotiating table, but I believe these new sanctions put in danger the very important nuclear agreement that was signed between the United States and its partners and Iran in 2015. In addition to that, Naveed, you had Rand Paul say that he voted against this bill because he thinks there's no point in tweaking Russia's nose, in his words. What do you think of that?
I mean, look, we should have the most severe sanctions against Russia as we possibly can. There's no reason not to. I don't think that sanctions are going to deter Russia. And look, Tara mentioned three prongs. There's a fourth prong here. And right now, if you're in Moscow, you're in Russian intelligence, there is no daylight in the belief that you believe that you recruited U.S. persons to be part of this campaign. The fourth prong is, in fact, the targeting, and I believe the recruitment of U.S. persons. And if you're Russia right now, you're thinking Michael Flynn was probably one of your assets. And so you're looking at this and saying, my goodness, we were able to get into the White House. So we can build the biggest fence, the biggest wall for cybersecurity. The reality is the Russians are very good at identifying U.S. persons, and the best way to sidestep cybersecurity is to get people. So today, Joy, we talk about sanctions, we talk about all this strong language, but as of yet, we have not spent $1 more on counterintelligence. We have not increased the workforce of the counterintelligence community by one person. And that is perhaps the biggest message. We can talk about sanctioning, but until we build up our counterintelligence capability, not just cyber, counterintelligence, we have left the door wide open for this stuff to happen again.
And Jordan, given that we do not have a White House that seems terribly interested in doing that, because they don't believe, at least the President of the United States does not seem to believe that Russia is a threat to the United States in that way, it seems like this is going to be one more thing that falls to the states. According to your reporting, what are the states doing to protect themselves against these kinds of cyber attacks now, knowing what they know?
Absolutely. It's a really interesting question. My big takeaway from this reporting, one of them was that Russia apparently was targeting the states and their voter registration databases. But one of the things that they must have discovered is that it's actually at the county level where this kind of tampering would have the greatest effect for an election hacker. So my big fear is that going into 2018 and going into 2020, what the Russians did in 2016 was reconnaissance. And one of the things that they likely figured out was that if you really want to do some damage, you do it at the county level. And I think we have to face the facts that states are going to be better prepared than counties, and counties are just really completely unprepared to secure their systems against these kinds of attacks. And that's what really concerns me.
And I'll bet they're short of cash to do it too. And I don't think any money's going to be coming from the federal government. Pretty scary. Jordan Robertson, Naveed Jamali, and Tara Mahler. Thank you all. Appreciate it. Thank you. And up next, the Russians aren't the only ones trying to mess around with the voter rolls. The Republicans know a thing or two about that as well. They actually know that game very well. More on that when we come back.
Senate healthcare bill unveiled today is a repudiation of nearly every promise the president made to the American public about his approach to the healthcare system. No cuts to Medicaid, very explicit on that, lower premiums and deductibles, and insurance coverage for everyone.
I'm not going to cut Social Security like every other Republican, and I'm not going to cut Medicare or Medicaid. Save Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security without cuts. Have to do it. We're going to have a health care that is far less expensive and far better. Yes, premiums will be coming down. Yes, deductibles will be coming down. Everybody's got to be covered. This is an un-Republican thing for me to say. I am going to take care of everybody. I don't care if it costs me votes or not. Everybody's going to be taken care of much better than they're taken care of now. You know, I've been talking about a plan with heart. I said, add some money to it. A plan with heart.
Strictly speaking, the bill doesn't even fulfill the president's promise to repeal the Affordable Care Act. It merely amends the ACA. In an off-camera briefing today, the deputy White House press secretary was asked specifically about the president's Medicaid promise.
So if cutting Medicaid was wrong when he was a candidate, why is it right in the new Republican Senate bill?
I don't believe that the president has specifically weighed in that it's right to cut Medicaid.
Does the president still believe, as he did as a candidate, that there should be no cuts to Medicaid?
I haven't had a specific conversation to see if there is an update to that, but I do know that he wants to protect that as much as possible.
But there has been an update to the president's position on Medicaid. The new position is, I like cutting Medicaid so much, I'm going to throw a party in the Rose Garden with House Republicans on TV in front of the whole country while we all watched. And if there was still any doubt, the president just tweeted, I am very supportive of the Senate healthcare bill. I'm joined now by Ezra Klein, editor-in-chief of Vox.com. Ezra, this was your summation. Senate bill, GOP health bill in one sentence, poor people pay more for worse insurance. I find the bait and switch here pretty remarkable, given the way that the president separated himself in the primary and the promises that he made.
This is a really bad day in American politics. It isn't supposed to work like this. There is this line that you're hearing when you talk to Republicans about this bill. Got to pass it because what they promised to do is repeal and replace Obamacare. They got to keep their promise. They made a promise to people, and you heard it when you
played Trump there, but also Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan and all the others, they understood what people didn't like about Obamacare. They didn't like that it left a lot of people uncovered. Mitch McConnell on Face the Nation said it left 25 million people uncovered, and he's right. They didn't like the deductibles were so high, premiums were too high, co-pays were too high. People ended up in insurance they couldn't afford to use. So they told people they would repeal and replace Obamacare with something that fixed these problems. And this makes every single one of those problems worse, every single one. Higher deductibles, higher premiums on an apples to apples comparison for insurance, higher co-pays, fewer people covered. You're supposed to be able to trust that people basically want to go in the direction they told you. Maybe they exaggerate. Maybe they're saying it's going to do more than they say. Well, but the basic direction. But that's not what this is at all. They said they would go one way, and they're going the exact opposite way.
You know, part of this too is comes back to this sort of the distributional impact of the Medicaid cuts. And I was in West Virginia in McDowell County, where 48% of people are on the Medicaid expansion there. And Paul Ryan said this thing. I want to play this for you because to me this is such a tell about what the agenda is here when you're talking about what they said they would do and what they're actually doing. Take a listen to this.
So Medicaid, sending it back to the states, capping its growth rate. We've been dreaming of this since I've been around, since you and I were drinking at a keg. You know,
I was thinking about something else. He was thinking about reforming Medicaid.
I was. I've been thinking about this for a long time.
I mean, to me, that shows you in some ways what this is.
But a lot was getting elided in a particular discussion. There are states that have refused to expand Medicaid by choice because they don't want poor people to have that health insurance. If they expanded Medicaid, those folks would get better health insurance. Now, if you move all the people who could get Medicaid onto these private plans, and particularly onto the much cheaper plans this bill is envisioning, what they get is health insurance that is much worse. They have to pay quite a bit more for. On page 5 of the bill, there is this piece that people are not going to report that much on because it's complicated. It's really important. The affordable needs to health insurance plans that covers 70% of your costs. This bill moves that down to 58%. A plan that covers 58% of your costs, you're looking at about a $7,000 deductible. So that, if you wanted to just encapsulate the plan with one move, it is that you move from health insurance that actually covers things, health insurance with about a $7,000 or more deductible. And subsidies, that is all you can get it for. It's a really, really profound change.
And that what's key there is that the insurance companies have basically sat on the sidelines. They've been essentially ostensibly publicly neutral on this. And part of what's insidious, I think, about this, which you're pointing to, is this sort of shoves a lot of money towards the insurance companies to sort of keep them neutral, as I understand the structure.
Oh, and it's worse than that. So if you look at the Affordable Care Act, the way they keep insurance markets stable is the individual mandate. They try to pull healthy people into the insurance markets. In this iteration of the bill, there is nothing that even replaces the individual mandate, right? They zero out the individual mandate. The House bill had something called continuous coverage, probably wouldn't have worked, but at least was a shot at replacing it. This has nothing. And so I asked people, how are you going to keep insurance markets stable? And they've got this multi-hundred-billion-dollar fund that they're just going to hand insurers money. You heard some Republicans calling it an insurance bailout. It's not a bailout, it's a payoff. It's a payoff for participating in the markets and not fleeing them.
All right, Ezra Klein, thank you for breaking that down. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hey there, I'm Chris.